We've been begging, Brian. We've been begging and begging and begging Elon to allow one YouTuber to do one interview, just one. He said that Dr. John Gibbs, he said that he was going to give it to Dr. John Gibbs. Dave Lee would be great. You'd be amazing. And of course, the perfect answer would be moi. But I just but I just got done listening to another interview. It kept getting interrupted on X. They've got to fix that problem. I don't know what's causing it. But this was Nikolai Tangen. He is the chief executive officer at Norges Bank Investment Management, I think in Norway or some such place. Big deal, biggest fund in Norway. And so somehow he got an interview. And because he's invested heavily in Tesla. But his questions were okay. Did you happen to listen to it?
I did not get a chance to catch it, no.
Yeah, his questions were okay, but it was like he seemed rushed and like no follow-up. He'd ask his question, Elon would sort of answer it, and then he'd just rush on to the next subject matter. I was thinking, again, you would be an amazing interviewer if you'd have the chance, if this was your day. Or we could think of it in terms of like the earnings call coming up in 16 days. What are the things that are burning in your mind that you would want to know?
So there's a bunch. Let's break it into two parts. If the earnings call is going to be very different kinds of questions than what you'd want to ask in an interview, because the scope of it is different. In the earnings call, I guess I'd want to know things like, are cars ever going to be available to purchase out of lease? If they can make that happen, that's a much better situation for battery sourcing. There's all kinds of rules in the IRA, but any kind of big bill is also going to be loaded with exceptions and loopholes. Right. So you've got makers like Ford who are putting 1 kilowatt hour batteries in their vehicles and getting credit, getting like big dollar credit for putting in a battery that is frankly a joke. That is ridiculous. And then, well, yeah, but we can build 100 EVs. Those aren't EVs. Stop calling them that. Instead of just one true EV. Right. But you're missing the entire point. No, we're not. We didn't make the exceptions. We're just exploiting them.
Sure.
So Tesla could do something also. They could put Chinese batteries in the cars, LFPs from CATL, from BYD, and make those, because you can still get the full amount of credit if it's on a lease. And people say, well, right, but if I'm not buying it, who's actually getting the credit? Believe me, my friend, you still are, because now your payments have been reduced by 10, 20%, maybe 25, depending on the deal you got. But that doesn't matter if it's a 3-year lease and you're giving it back. Great, your payments were lower, but you still don't have the car. So you'd want to then be able to buy it out at the end of that lease. And I don't know, you might even be able to get the used EV incentive at that point because it wasn't your car. Somebody else owned it. So you may be able to double dip in that regard. So one question I would ask is there going to become a possible outcome where people buy it? I think the answer I think the answer is no.
And I saw someone else raise that issue completely for a different reason the other day, thinking that it would increase sales right now, that smart people, not the folks that are just like, oh boy, I can get a car for $259 a month, but folks who have tax incentives or other reasons why they think they're leasing vehicles. When you take away the ability to buy it at the end, you've eliminated some of the advantages that some people see. So we're getting apparently a very low number of leases compared to auto companies on the Teslas. So that would be another reason for a change in policy there. In fact, you got to know I'm sure there's statistics out there on the percentage of people that do just turn them back in. I always turn mine back in. I've done a number of leases. I always turn it back in. So, maybe there's enough that would be turned back in anyway, if you were allowing folks to make that choice.
And if you're going to be ramping production like crazy, do you really need all these secondhand cars
Yeah.
when you could just build new cars and put those into service? You're still going to get the same number of miles out of them.
Right.
I don't know. That'd be one of the things I'd ask. In a longer form interview, I've got a lot of questions I'd want to know. Things like, what is the actual throughput of a Starlink satellite? What is the actual throughput? We can do some really great math if we know what that number is. But until we do, then what are we even doing? So I'd say that then you've got, and that's just on Starlink. That's just on one little thing. There's a lot of big questions. I'd want to know what different parts of different factories actually do. Is the Berlin design studio actually designing a car? Is the Shanghai design studio actually designing a car? We heard years ago that every gigafactory would have its own design center,
Yeah.
and then we've never heard anything about it since. Oh, my headphones are being weird, but there's a lot of opportunities there. I'm gonna see if I can just keep these working. The battery says it's low, but we'll find out. So yeah, I have a lot of questions like that. What were some of the other questions that were asked that you didn't like?
Oh, well, again, he would ask a question like, let's say, what about the Chinese car competition? And Elon would say, well, they're the most competitive group of car makers out there. They're really good at manufacturing. They work hard. They've got good product, good quality cars. My people tell me that who have driven them. He says, I haven't driven one for a while, but my team says that they're good cars. And okay, so that's where he dropped it. He drops the question right there. I'm like, so what does that mean for Tesla in the Chinese market? What does that mean in terms of your expectations going forward? Does that just mean you have to fight harder? Does it mean that you need to make changes? Does it mean anything with regard to the Gen 3 vehicle in terms of whether it's going to be made in China or not as a consumable? Et cetera, et cetera. I could have just, dig a little deeper, get to the meat.
An easy question I would ask on either an earnings call or an interview is the compact going to be a car that is sold? Is the Robotaxi going to be for sale? And is the compact the Robotaxi? And I guess the third question would be, how many form factors will the next model be? Because
Yes.
I am still of the belief that it's going to be many different things. It could be a different one for each design center. It could be two for each design center. There could be opportunities to import and export them to other markets around the world. I think it's going to be a very exciting vehicle. And then, of course, another big question would be, so India, is that all smoke and mirrors? Or are we actually doing this?
Yeah. Well, he did ask about India. I think that's when the time it got cut off, and it never seemed to re-engage. So I never got to hear the India answer, other than it is the largest country in the world, and that they need to have EVs there too. And that's when it got cut off. So for whatever reason. Well, on your previous question on form factor on the Gen 3, what are your 2 or 3 picks? Everybody thinks it's going to be a hatchback, but other than is that your number one, or do you have something else as a number one?
So I do think it's going to be a hatchback. And I think it'll be maybe just a 2-door hatchback at that, because we've seen a lot of 4-door hatches. The Chevy Bolt comes to mind, the BYD Seagull comes to mind, and they're just not sexy. They just don't have the curb appeal. Now, Tesla's design are very solid. They could actually make something that's attractive and inspired. Whether they would or not's a different matter. And if we're going to use any kind of radical new design, it could automatically be very cool or automatically be impossible to make cool. We just don't know yet, because I'm sure they've got tricks up their sleeve that we have yet to imagine. So I think those are going to be big factors to consider. What do I think we're going to get? I think if for a compact, a hot hatch. I think if it's a Robotaxi platform as well, I think we might see facing seating where it's facing each other. I don't know how that works in terms of crash testing, but I suspect having your head against a headrest is probably not worse than being loose and waiting for an airbag to catch you. Though I'm not sure how you restrain the rear passengers from flying into the front passengers. But there are engineers whose job it is to be smarter than me.
A large bag comes down in the middle of everybody. Here you go.
That's honestly not bad. You could just put it on the
Right.
roof rails
Right.
and just fill the space in between you. That's not
Exactly.
bad at all.
Yeah, yeah.
See, that's why we pay you the big bucks.
So, no, as my partner and I used to say, that's why we're owed the big bucks.
Yeah, we never got it. We
Never
did
got it.
invoice, but
boy, where we owed the big bucks. Okay, so what about, do you think there'll be a truck, a little, mini truck type thing?
not anytime soon. That could be something that happens eventually, but not anytime soon. A lot of people say, boy, if I could just get a little Datsun size pickup, boy, that would just be my absolute dream. They make small pickups. They're not very popular. The Hyundai Santa Fe is, I think, a very cool little truck. Doesn't move big numbers. It's just, there are things people say they want that maybe is not what they actually want.
What about in other markets? I feel like in Latin America, Africa, some places, those little tiny pickups do very well.
Sure. I think Latin America might be a better choice. If we're already making big plans to sell into that market, then sure. I don't know if it's something you need on day one. So I think maybe a 4-door, maybe a 2-door. But I think a little van would have a lot more utility than a little pickup. And I think it's important for them to get that out and
A little
going.
passenger van or a commercial van?
Well, it'd be both, wouldn't it?
Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. So, what other questions would you have? Well, you started to talk about India, but that kind of raises the question for me, hot on my list, because I'm usually asking you. So if I could ask Elon and he'd give me a straight answer, what's happening with India, Reno, second factory in China? There's something else I'm missing. The eventual manufacture of Gen 3s in Berlin. I mean, there's
Did they ask what the delays are with Mexico or Reno? Oh,
no,
for goodness sake, missed opportunity.
no.
It's amazing to me to see the people who get access because they hold funds and they can move money around and that can make markets. But these people, I do not understand how they're employed because they're just not good at their jobs. I had a video just yesterday tearing apart Adam Jonas's Morgan Stanley research on Tesla
You
because
too.
oh yeah, do you do that as well? It was, I'm looking at it thinking, you think by 2030 it's only going to be 34% of unit sales? That's have you heard any of the announcements before now? This would be over 50%, maybe as much as 60-70%, because it's going to be extreme scale. That's the name of the game for Master Plan Part 3. I just don't understand how you can do this for a living and be so wrong.
One of my questions would be, certainly for the earnings call, if not for a general interview, would be what in the world is going on with batteries? I mean, we have all of these battery manufacturers all over the world that have excess capacity, have lowered their price because they can't get them sold. They're lowering their price also because they're able to make them at scale, make them better, make them with different kinds of raw materials. And yet we keep kind of being a little confused about, like, is there a problem at Tesla with regard to not having enough batteries, let's say for Megapacks, or not having enough batteries for, say, the Model 3, or not having enough batteries for, say, the Cybertruck. Now, I know some of those need to be a certain form factor, but gosh, it seems like there's a gajillion batteries, and yet we're arguing about whether some products are not popping and not being able to be made in volume because of batteries.
Well, so yeah, they're all good questions. I haven't seen a battery shortage materialize. I don't think that's the reason for a slower than expected ramp in Megapack out of California. I don't think that's the reason for it's certainly not the reason for a delay in China, where they would have access
Mhm.
to the local batteries, and batteries are not in short supply. So I don't know. I would really, really like the semi. Does it work or not? And if it does work, why are we not selling them? There are customers who would pay $1 million for them. Why not keep the pilot line running and build little handmade ones for $1 million and collect your $200,000 to $400,000 premium, even with the inefficiencies of a hand built line? It feels like the sort of thing you would just want to do to get them out there, get the market adoption moving. And I get it. Once you turn on the machine, it's going to spit them out in huge numbers, but you haven't started building the factory yet. You've pushed some dirt around, but that's about it.
Yeah, and
The
there was a little speculation I saw somewhere the other day, though, that maybe that preliminary line, that test line, they're going to start spitting them out there again, maybe a few a week or something. Did you see that?
I did see that, and I hope it's true, because there have been, I'm sure, substantial refinements to the semi's design
Right.
since the first deliveries to Frito-Lay. I think it'd be, if the, again, does it work or not? I think it does. Let's move some. So let's get them out there. I did have a chance to see John from Tesla Owners of Silicon Valley posted. He got to see under the hood of
Oh,
the
yeah.
Tesla Semi, and it is as tightly packaged and efficient as anything you'll see from any Tesla product. You compare that with a Kenworth, a Freightliner, an E-Cascadia, and they take up the entire engine bay of a space that used to have a ginormous engine and transmission, and they just fill it. They have no look at all this free real estate. We'd be crazy not to use every inch of it. And Tesla's approach is, we can make the truck shorter and safer by just using the engineering that we're good at
Right.
to keep the parts tightly packed and working well. So it's pretty crazy to see the difference in approach to the design.
So, of course, the number one thing that is being talked about all over X would have been another one of my questions, and that and not only by X, but even by some of the more clever and analysts. I think Morgan Stanley even brought it up, and Canaccord brought it up, and all these guys have brought it up over the last 3 days, and that is about, are there any phone calls coming into Elon asking about the possibility of licensing FSD now that we're seeing these amazing videos?
You have to wonder. What I was saying last week is it would be very smart for a small manufacturer who doesn't have the resources to crack the code in-house to just announce a partnership. Say, look, we're not putting them on the cars today or tomorrow, but Tesla has a clear lead, and consider us done. As soon as they're done, we're done too. We can stop spending money on it. We can stop having to answer questions from investors. I think both stocks would pop. If it's someone like Mazda or
Yeah.
Suzuki, it would make sense for them to not spend all that money and try and go it alone. And instead, it's crazy to me that every single company thinks somehow magically they're going to be the ones to beat the cumulative efforts of, we've got to be what, $200 billion into this so far between all the different companies. And a lot of them have hit their local maximum, and it's clear they're not going to be able to ever reach level 5 with their approaches. And it's bizarre.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, the question would be, Elon, you said in an earnings call a couple of years ago, that there were, or maybe a year ago, that you were
Yeah.
getting calls, that you were in serious conversations with people about licensing FSD. So, where are you now? Are you in serious
Mm.
conversations?
I hadn't heard that. I had heard licensing generally.
It's
I
possible.
don't recall it being FSD specific. And I know that within the last 6 months, he has said no one is on the radar today as seriously considering it. But these conversations are ongoing all the time. The industry is not that big. All the same people and you talk to each other. That's why the Ford announcement for the supercharging partnership kind of came out of left field. It wasn't left field. That was surely something that had been worked on for ages. It just finally matured. And Ford decided, you know what? Today's the day. Let's announce it. That way, no one will buy our cars for a year.
So another question that I have, and this is only because of you, Brian. It's only
Oh.
because you made me wise at least once. And that's with regard to the Model 3. And you were the one that cleverly said to me, Randy, sedans sell in the United States, they even sell, but across the world they sell very well. And the Model 3 now is, I don't think there's any question at this point that not only it is maybe the best car, best sedan on the market in kind of, depending on how you look at it. I mean, maybe somebody wants that Mercedes thing, in terms of the interior, but in terms of quiet and stereo and comfort and all the things that are being talked about, the Model 3 right now just seems to be way up at the top in terms of outstanding. And now you put a $35,000 price tag on it, and it's the best value, undeniably the best value. That takes, well, you can't then lease it so that you get the benefit. Anyway, so I think one of my questions would be, how are Model 3 car sales going in each territory?
Sure.
Because I was expecting them to just blow up. And then if they're not doing well, why not? And then third, what are you going to do if they are blowing up? How are you going to manage the ability to increase the numbers?
So let's start with how popular are sedans. And as you said, popular. Around the world, they are the best selling. They are very big. It's the US that loves their trucks and SUVs. Other countries don't get on board quite as aggressively. The Model Y has been a nice compromise because you do get a lot of cubic space, almost as much as a Model X in a much smaller package. People love that. But the Model 3 in China appears to be selling reasonably well. Why not better? It's a better car than they had a year ago. It's cheaper than it was a year ago. You're getting a whole lot more bang for your buck. And the answer appears to be there's just so many electric sedans in China to choose from, and many of them are less expensive. I would argue that the Tesla Model 3 is still the best value, but for some people, value doesn't matter if they can't afford it. So there's going to be serious competition in that regard. And the warranties are quite good. So if you're worried that the car you're buying may not be as trouble-free, you've got some time to work it out before the trouble is your responsibility. The only consideration there is, will that company still be around?
Right.
And so far, the failures have only been among the very smallest players, not the serious players. Makes it a little easier. How is it selling in other countries? In Europe, it appears to be selling well. In other parts of Asia, it's selling well. But it's not the gangbuster runaway success, in part because, again, there is other competition, and in part because some people just want something new, maybe. Some people are just not ready to go electric for whatever reasons, real or imagined. So that's a big consideration there. Now, your last question is your most exciting one. What do we do, man? What if the demand outstrips the supply? What if we could make it cheaper? And we can. Well, I would not be surprised to see a line in Berlin or Texas retooled to produce Model 3. Why not? And at that point, Fremont almost becomes redundant. You could take some time to rebuild that, which I've had on my tracker for ages as a likely outcome. Because as efficient as the NUMMI plant was in Fremont when GM and Toyota built it as a joint venture, and it was a very efficient plant, it was efficient by 1980s standards. And in the last 20 years, a few things have changed, or 40 years. Yeah, a few things have changed in terms of just looking at the flow of the direction, the way the place is laid out, the use of vertical space. Philosophies in manufacturing have changed dramatically. So what I would kind of like to see is the Model Y lines in Texas or Berlin or both retooled so that they could produce Model 3s. There's a very real possibility they could do that. And we know it's possible because some of the Model 3 equipment originally in Fremont was just repurposed to build the Model Y when they needed another line. So it's not impossible. It's just has would be something that they would just have to do. And that improved scale would result in a reduced of cost of goods sold. The more efficient style of the assembly line would result in new efficiencies that would increase margins, reduce prices, or both. So there's some real opportunity there.
So if that's true, and they could really reduce, again, maybe at the 2% per quarter rate, continue to reduce the cost of making the Model 3. There was a few people yesterday that bandied around the idea that you could make a Model 3 version that would be scaled down, not quite as nice seats, not quite as nice this and that. Take out this, not quite as many speakers, in the stereo, just pull it down to where it could be a $25,000 car.
It's close already, especially when you figure in the tax incentive. It's already real close to a $25,000 car. And we're already past the inflection point as far as I'm concerned, where it starts to become ridiculous. The idea that I'm going to pay more for a gas car up front so that over the next 5 to 10 years, I can pay more to operate it. Come on, that's the only reason I would buy a gas car today was if I was living in an apartment where charging was a problem. Yeah, where it was very tricky.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, we've seen this story before, though. I think certainly in California and some other places, New York, et cetera, that are highly regulated. Some say communist. Oh, did I say that out loud? YouTube, don't delist me. I didn't really mean that California was communist. Anyway, in some places that have lots and lots of regulations, it wouldn't shock me that apartment owners at least would be required to allow their tenants to put in electrical charging if there is parking, and or made to or required to put in electrical if they have more than, say, 4 or 5 units or something. I can imagine that happening soon.
I would be it will spur adoption for sure if they've got more charging. Maybe don't go all as far as France went, where they said every parking lot
Yes.
must have solar canopies, even if you've only got 10
Right.
spots. What that meant is, okay, so a lot less parking is going to be available.
Yeah.
So that would be, what are they going to say? You must put it? No, but I think certainly for all new construction, it'd be insane to not require it. This is the future. This building is going to be there for 30, 40, 50 years. And this is what we need. So at least making 10% of the spots available with level 2 charging, or a higher percentage with level 1. If you had, 30, 40% of the spots with level 1 charging, an awful lot of people can get by with trickle charging during the week. And especially if they just need to top off once in a while at a public charger, it would really help.
All right. Well, last question that I will be asking. Well, actually, it'd probably be the first question right now. If I had Elon Musk in front of us at this very moment, I think my next question would be, last week, Reuters said that you're eliminating the Gen 2 vehicle as far as being a passenger car. I mean, as far as being a purchasable, drivable with a steering wheel type car, in favor of going 100% into robotaxis. Is that true or is it not? Please tell us directly. No, that none of this waffling. Is the Gen 3 going to happen as a consumer vehicle?
And my guess is yes. That's why we still have the $25,000 price target. It may be that the vehicle can be more than one thing. The Reuters article had a whole lot of problems, but all of them can be summed up by the headline. The headline said that the compact is canceled, and we know because we have heard of one project with a code name that is no longer needed from one supplier. That could mean that they chose a different supplier. That could mean that that particular tail light or blinker or headliner is no longer needed. It could mean that they've just taken a different approach. And the headline also said, because of China competition. Nowhere in those emails was, you are guessing, you are making two big leaps based on inadequate information. Getting a leaked email that says one, I mean, come on, this is just, and Reuters, this is not the first time they've completely goofed. They don't care about accuracy. They care about clicks. They are a for-profit business motivated strictly, not by quality, but by eyeballs. And it's going to be the death of them.
As Elon said, they are already dying. So I'll just put in my 2 cents and you can speak to it. My 2 cents was maybe what's really happening is maybe the consumer version of the Gen 3 vehicle will not be made in China, because so far, I don't think we've heard anybody say it's going to be made in China. And because the competition is really strong in that price point in China, that might be a true fact. However, the competition for that model car in the United States or in Europe or in Australia or in pick your poison. In the rest of the world, the competition is not as strong, and there would be an absolute, I think, a huge number of units possible to sell in those other markets.
So we have not heard that the new factory is going to be built in Shanghai. We knew the Megapack factory would, and then we saw that announced. We saw the groundbreaking. We've seen some progress on the construction. I deduce that it will be made in China because it would still sell some. The Model 3 in China was a crazy idea. Really? You're going to sell a car that was 50 grand at the time in China, of all places, and it worked. It still worked. And not to minimize it, China is an export hub. If they can build it in China, it'll be presumably cheaper than building it somewhere else in Asia, and they could continue exporting it to other markets from there. So a China factory would make sense, but I have not seen anything concrete to suggest that that is an immediate plan.
Right. Okay, but we certainly would expect the Chinese factory to be making a Robotaxi version of the Gen 3 vehicle, right?
I assume so. I don't see why they wouldn't. It appears that regulatory approval is imminent for FSD in China, and that is going to be the future. There are companies already claiming to operate level 3 in China, level 2 and 3, with, I have not seen a whole lot of evidence to support that. You'd think there'd be videos all over social media of people checking it out, but there are not. So I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen there.
All right. Well, I think that is a fraction, as you mentioned, a fraction of the questions that either one of us would have for Elon if we were so fortunate as to get that phone call from whoever it is that's in charge of scheduling his calls. And maybe we could get a bunch of us YouTubers all at once on Spaces or something, and go round robin asking questions. I don't know, but there's got to be a solution to getting Elon to ask more in-depth questions than what he's being asked in the last like 10 interviews that have not been that great, in my opinion. What do you guys think?
I think he avoids it on purpose because our questions are too good and the answers would be too revealing. And I mean that.
Well, and it's okay for him to say, I can't say anything. You know, yeah, we can all take our own conclusions when he says that he can't say anything. That's okay. So if you folks out there, there's a few things I'd like to request that you do. One of those would be to follow this funny man over here. He's got this new channel. He came up with this weird name, Futuraza, and I've been plugging it. Hopefully it's working. I don't know. He said he had videos last week where 10,000 different people came to visit and see his channel. So maybe you should be the 10,001th person to come and watch Brian. So Futuraza on Twitter, and Futuraza over there at Patreon as well. And then the other thing you might do is let us know in the comments below what questions you would ask if you were so fortunate as to be able to ask the questions. I'd love to know that. Would you like to know that, Brian?
I'd be very curious because that's there's a lot of smart people who watch your channel. I don't know why.
My wife has been asking that question. Even my mother has been asking that question. Okay, well, that's enough of that. I don't want to go any further on that one. All right, that's all we got for now. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about, we're going to have a brainstorming session again. It sort of worked last week, so we'll see if it'll work 2 weeks in a row. And to all of you out there, it's been great talking to you.